Hello, this is Silas here. I'm back with my friend Steven. You can say hello.
Hello, everyone.
We're continuing our conversation series, and this one is about Cracks in the Ivory Tower, the moral mess of higher education, written by Jason Brennan and Philip Magnus. And this
Mhm.
is part of a multi-series of different sections, and this is just parts. Steven, tell us a bit about why we're talking about this book.
Sure. So, this ongoing discussion has been regarding the ethical concerns in higher education, everything from the incentives faculty, administration, and students face, the cheating that goes on, why colleges produce too many PhDs, why students can't find jobs when they come out, why colleges don't deliver as promised, et cetera, et cetera. Again, as I've mentioned a few times now, this isn't so much the ideological issues in academia, but it more the incentive structures as far as economics. So it's a very public choice sort of analysis of the university system.
Yeah. And with this, we're focusing on the 9,500 schools in the United States of America, institutions of higher learning, as they are also called. But the importance of this is, as we're recording this right now, all eyes are on the United States of America. And by the time we post this, we'll probably have more information about it. But the way things are regardless of what we actually see about it. The effect of the United States of America is still much higher than any other location I think has known in recent memory. It is a superpower, and the way that place goes, a lot of countries look and want to emulate. So, be that just the political system or what's going on right now, as I record this, and probably will still be going on by the time we post this,
Yeah.
people look at the schooling system and say, oh, what's happening in the United States of America, the positive things about them. Oh, that comes because of the education system. Let's actually emulate that and simulate that and do things in the same way. Many schools send thousands of their kids and youngest and brightest into the schooling system, specifically the higher education system in the United States of America. And these people take those influences back to their countries and start building societies and cultures like that. So when we start talking about this thing, if you think that's not important or that has no effect, like we shouldn't be talking about this topic, then why is the schools even there? If what happens in schools doesn't really have an effect on the society and culture that's created from it, then why have the schools? But if you agree that it does, then actually having majority or a large significant amount of the elites or whatever influential people that you think exist in the world coming to the United States of America and being indoctrinated. I think schooled is a better term. Being schooled in that environment and then taking the extra outside of simply just the education from there, because we are more than just ideas, we're feelings, emotions, interactions, and all these things. We're more than just our physical bodies. There's more into what we are. So if that's coming from the school, what's being learned in the schooling systems and then exported or into other countries by the expats or by the immigrants that come in to learn and go back, that's significant. This is something important. I think that's why content like this is rather important, because there's this tweet where somebody said, like, thinking 8-year-old Twinkies were basically immortal. Colin Purrington found that they tasted like an old sock. So West Virginia
Ugh.
University scientists who study fungus and mold tested the cakes and discovered they'd literally been mummified. And then my post to that was like, without state-funded institutions of higher learning, who would test the mummified Twinkies? And then I'm just thinking, in order to publish this research, would there be at least three other people to do the what's it called, the falsification thing? Would three other people have to at least take their own studies of 8-year-old Twinkies in order to make sure that that Twinkie also gets mummified? So with stuff like that, this is the systems that exist. We just had a one chapter talking about the too many PhDs. There's even when you think there's too many PhDs, it's a lot lower in number than I think most people would assume that it is,
Mhm.
which is kind of an inverse situation of what we were talking about in the 1619 project conversation. We were asking about the amount of slaves people would think without actually researching and looking into it would be a lot higher. And this was an inverse. The amount of people who actually have degrees, especially when it comes to PhDs and masters and postgraduate ones, is a lot lower, and doctorates is a lot lower. But you have these are probably PhD students studying the Twinkie, studying the mummified Twinkie. Now, technically, they might be some advancement coming out of this for perishability of food, making food that can deal in space or can be stored for a long time. They could be practicalities, but is this truly the system, the best way, the best system to do this? Like, could there be a way to do this outside? So I don't know if you have
Well,
anything else. I'm going to get
well,
to
I
the
was
chat.
I was going to make just two comments. Did you ever see the thing? I think it was in the Super Size Me documentary they did where they were testing how long fries held up, and they found that
Uh-huh.
McDonald's fries, because of preservatives, they can last a few months. And I know someone who did the same experiment in school, and I think they lasted a year. And then they
Yeah,
say that typical fries will last like a week or something. So it's like, it's just what are you putting into your body? There's that,
yeah,
and then the other thing that I thought was interesting was what someone wrote in our comments on our fat studies video, where they said something like fat studies is the result of academia that's short on sanity but not on dollars. And it's like that makes a lot of sense because it's getting all this state money so they can prop up all this stuff. Whereas I think we would both argue that in a freer market in education, you would have to actually provide value. If it's like, we're going to talk about why being fat supposedly is a good thing, well, you'd have to convince people that's valuable, and it'd be a much tougher case. But if you just keep getting funding from the state, well, you can say a lot of what you want.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd had a separate, a previous understanding where it was one of those few moments. It's like, oh wow, like I have a new way of looking at things, or just thinking about the term like mental obesity and junk information. And I think that's what's happening a lot in the United States of America, where yes, you might have a vast range, and they talk about this about the food deserts in certain inner city areas, where they say sure they have access to calories, but the quality of the calories is questionable, and
Yeah.
you see the result. And I agree with that. But that's a similar thing. Sure, people might have access to institutions of learning, but the quality of the actual content they're taking in is questionable, and then you see the results from that. And this is part of what inspired, I think, our original series of talking about you are what you consume, because you are more than just the physical self. It's not simply just, if it was simply just you are what you consume, and we're looking at just the brass tacks of it, then you take IVs of just the percentage of proteins that you needed, the percentage of the fats that you needed, the percentage of carbs that you needed, and that would be it. But no, we cook, we harvest, we farm. There's all these other things connected to it. Then when you actually, the way you prepare it has influence in it, and that's the same thing. I think that when you come with this actual information, and we are in a situation where people are doing something positive in that ingesting food in learning, that's positive in and of itself. But the actual practicality of what's happening, the information being exchanged, what's being learned from it versus what could be exchanged and could be learned is really struggling. I think is really not in a good place. And I think we've already established that in these chapters that we've talked about, and probably will continue to do so as we wind down with this conversation.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Sure.
anything else? Or chapter
No,
list?
that's it. We can jump right in.
Okay. So let me read the chapter list to you now, and here we go. First one is Neither Gremlins Nor Poltergeists. Number 2 was What the Academics Really Want. Number 3, why most academic advertising is immoral bullshit. Number 4, on reading entrails and student evaluations. Number 5, grades, communication breakdown. Number 6, when moral language is a cover for self-interest. Number 7, the general education hustle. Number 8, why universities produce too many PhDs. Number 9, cheaters everywhere, and that's what we'll be reading today. And number 10, or discussing today. And number 10, 3 big myths about what's plaguing higher education. Number 11, answering the taxpayers. Mm-hmm. And there's another part that is discussing something that was taken out from the book that Stephen accurately pointed out was rather important. I think with the previous series, like I say, you can listen to any order and also in this one, but this one I suggest that you either pause or listen to this after if you haven't listened to it before. The one separate video about 7 big economic insights and the normative business ethic questions and descriptive business ethic questions that are what the authors were using to focus on this book. It's what we use to focus on the book. And we also think they're rather important things for just in general of approaching the world. If you just tweak out the education focus that is actually placed in the wording that's over in that video. Yeah, and by the time we actually post this, I think I was laughing about this with Stephen earlier, is we probably would have recorded, I think, all of them. I just uploaded the actual first part of this with chapter 1, and we'll be looking into getting some podcast version or some audio version to be accessible in that means, and that will definitely be up and ready by the time you listen to this. So there is a good chance that if we actually record these in the next couple of days, that this weekend when I'm posting that first one, we'd have actually recorded the entire series and then be set up to start the next series, which is going to be reading Human Action by Mises. I'm really looking forward to that one, and we might have a bit of a twist on how we do it and see some way of having more like live readings, maybe where there can be more interaction and certain aspects of it as we want to do, as I want to do a really deep dive into it. I think it's important, as important as other things, but extra important. So yeah, anything else or?
Nope, that's it. We can jump right in.
Okay, so lead us with chapter 9.
Sure. So this is called Cheaters Everywhere. So this chapter will discuss, as you can probably tell, most undergraduates cheat to some extent in college. Research has shown that at least half commit a serious act of intellectual dishonesty. 20 to 40% cheat repeatedly. So why is this? So the poltergeists that get blamed are things like neoliberalism or consumer mentality. Well, first off, cheating didn't suddenly start with Ronald Reagan or Margaret Thatcher. That's when people consider neoliberalism, vague as a term as that is, started. But the first research on this was done in the 1960s by William Bowers and found that at least 75% of students admitted to engaging in some form of academic dishonesty, and about 50% admitted to engaging at least one or more serious forms of dishonesty. So more recent replications of that study were done by Douglas McCabe and Linda Trevino, and they find that students admit to cheat at roughly the same rates, or in fact, slightly lower rates. So can we blame neoliberalism or consumer mentality? No, because cheating is easy, because students are bad at time management, because they expect it to work, because they reasonably expect not to get caught, and because they believe that their peers also cheat. Any thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, this is again practical. This is why I think it's worth, and we continue reiterating that we don't think these people are inherently evil. Yeah. I think it was excellent to have that first chapter be titled "Neither Gremlins nor Poltergeists," is because we are like tilting at windmills where we're creating these caricatures of people, of our supposed opposition or people we don't agree with, and it makes it easier for us to dehumanize them and be like, oh, that's inhuman. No. The ability and diversity of the human experience and human condition is massive. Like it's beyond probably what you can imagine. Like if a human does something, don't be like, oh, I can't believe they did that, or that's inhuman. It's like, no, they're also humans. They were able to imagine doing it and then go further to doing it. Just because it's beyond something you could just consonance doesn't mean it's beyond humans to countenance and do. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And now when we talk about this, and as I mentioned, I think I don't know if I mentioned this in the pre-talk, I don't know if we mentioned it during, there's some current situations going on as we record this on November 5th, where there's some questions of some veracity of what has been going on here and there. And some people are like, there's no way that would happen. And other people are like, okay, yeah, even if it did happen, it didn't really happen that much. Or even if it did happen, it should have happened because we can defend why we're doing it. And that's something that I've struggled with personally, talking about, is honesty a privilege? Where it's almost like you have to be really, really wealthy to not really have to deal with the consequences of just telling the truth all the time, because you don't really need the regular people of society, because you can deal without them. Or you have to be on the inverse side and just be completely poor. You're just living on you're okay with to just consign yourself to just live isolated. So it doesn't really matter what people think about you. And you're also so isolated that if you just keep telling the truth, you're no threat to anyone with more power than you, that they won't. No one's really going to believe this person, or this person has no effect. So why do I care what they say? So on those two kind of ends, I think those are the people who can truly just be 100% honest and say, I never cheat, I never steal, I never lie. I just tell the truth all the time. Not my truth, the truth that's just out there to people to see. I just point out reality. When it comes down to it, if you look at reality, you look at nature, the human animal cheats constantly. Societies are built on cheating. It's not, in this case, it's not that schools create cheating and that's why people who graduate from the educational system cheat. It's like, no, life forms that understood the practical nature of having to cheat and steal and be dishonest on certain things created the schools in their image to serve their biology and their society. And that's why cheating is still in there. And that's why we need to have conversations like this. We need to rethink about these things, and we can build structures and constructs, social constructs that are more applicable, because I think being closer to reality, being closer to the truth is more pro-human flourishing. So that's just about that. So I'm saying the cheating happens. I understand it happens. I don't think it's a positive thing. I don't think it's inherently negative. It's just a thing that happens. And then now you can discuss with the morality or the ethical nature of the things. In some cases, it's almost actually, I don't know if it's immoral. Definitely it can be unethical to not lie and cheat sometimes. And I think that's what's going on right now in the United States of America. Some people have a perception of the parties involved where they're 100% accepting that even if you could show them 100% proof that this was a cheating, stealing, lying section, they think the threat present is completely justified. It actually makes it the moral duty for you to cheat and steal at any level you could possibly show them has occurred. That's just my thoughts on that. Yeah.
Okay, sure. All right. So next section is called "Everybody Cheats a Little, Some Cheat a Lot." So it's hard to know how many students. It's hard. It's hard to know how.
Apologies. Sorry. I think I should be saying this in the opening. The way these things go, and it might be different when we talk about Mises' Human Action, because in that one we both actually read the thing, and we're debating whether we'll both read it again. I'm reading it for my first time right now. I'm still going through it, and so I'm more in the position that Stephen has been in on the 1619 project and the critical theory one. When you are what we consume, it was more just general knowledge or things we'd watch together. So in this book, Stephen has actually read the book and he's leading me through it. So sometimes something going like a rant like I did, and it's not normally as direct where it's like literally the next thing he says from the book is covering what I said in a more concise way. But sometimes I'll say something and then a few chapters later that will come up, or Stephen will kind of say like, oh yeah, that's actually covered in, so that happened. So excuse us for that.
No, that's all right. Okay. Well, and it's interesting too. I would just add that reading this book, it's interesting because there are certain things in here that confirmed what I believe. I mean, you can accuse me of confirmation bias, but then there were other things that were a little surprising. And then there's other things that sort of confirmed what I knew, but they delved deeper into it. And I thought that was interesting too. Like, oh, wow, I didn't know it was this crazy, or,
Yeah, like the thing on tenure, that was one thing I think was something that we both were like, oh, wow, that's interesting. That is a different take on this. So, yeah, I hope that's happening for all of you who have decided to thankfully that I'm thanking for deciding to take your time to listen to this. But, we hope that, and in some situations, I understand there's different ways to structure things, but I think I appreciate this whole conversational nature of these things. And when we do things in different ways, we'll try to tell you that, okay, this is what we're going after this, but this one is still more of a conversation that we're going for. Okay.
Sure. All right. So it's hard to know how many students truly cheat, as this data is mostly collected through anonymous surveys, and you have to assume not everyone will be honest. So students, like most people, generally show social desirability bias on surveys, so they try to answer in ways that make them look good. So, for example, it's been shown on anonymous surveys that people will actually lie about how much they give to charity and underestimate how much they cheat. So if half of students say that they cheat, it's probably more than that. And the most comprehensive work is from William Bauer, done in 1962 to 1963, again, along with Donald McCabe, who I mentioned, and his co-authors, done in the most recent one was 2017, but they did a few in decades prior. So I can send you the chart, but it's very nice. They break it up, the original study, but then each of the McCabe studies, and then the they got for cheating on different things. And they list the different offenses, like, for example, let's see here, copying sentences without credit, getting the exam questions in advance, turning in papers written by other students, getting the answers from other students during an exam, etc. They have a few of these different things, and they have the percentage of students that admit to doing that each time. Percentages range anywhere between 6 to 83%. So there definitely are. Yeah. Wow. There are a lot of cheaters. And again, these are the people who admit to it. Again, who knows how many will do it but won't fess up. And yeah, the studies were done in 1991, 1994, 2000, and 2010. And then it was published in 2017. So, and the rate of cheating officially appears to have declined, but it's also wondered if students are catching on to this. Plus, the online studies also, they could potentially be hacked and traced. So they wonder if maybe I better be careful how I answer this, because if this were to be found out that I wrote this, then okay, people are going to keep a closer eye after that. That's a theory, but it's not exactly proven. Male and female students cheated about the same rate. Students with lower GPAs generally cheat more than students with higher GPAs, but some studies find that students with very high GPAs cheat even more than students with merely good GPAs. So students in professional schools or with pre-professional majors cheat more than students in liberal arts, social science, or science majors. So again, they're wondering, is it students who have to get perfect scores and are pretty good, that pushes them over the edge? Like, we'll get more into this at the end, but I don't think there are any students that got straight A's purely by cheating. It's probably a mix of, like, some of it's hard work, and then, they might face tremendous pressure from their family. So maybe they'll cheat a little on this one thing. And then students who are really struggling, they want to pass. So of course they cheat even more. So again, some of this is theoretical, but that's what they found so far. Any thoughts?
Yeah. With this one, this stuff so fascinated me. really into this kind of information, just studying the human animal. Like for me, like people watching was one thing I've been doing, and I think in part due to like moving around as a kid, not really fitting into certain cultures. I'd moved somewhere else and I'd be like, okay, I got to watch these people and figure out how I can fit in. Why are they doing this in this way? And I think I just internalized that, and it's just my modus operandi of just dealing with people. And then eventually I got old enough where it's like, okay, I don't care about fitting in. Like because I don't really I understand why so many people do some of these things where I see a lot of people just doing things in autopilot, just going with certain expectations. There's also things I do like that, where once upon a time I used to be like, oh, there's no way that can be conspiracy because not enough people would actually be able to keep that lie away. Like it would be so easy. It will come out. Like people will find out about these things. But two things. I was not really understanding or aware, cognizant of how willing people are to share lies. Like something I've said is I think the main thing that organizes most friendships and relationships, and I have a separate video talking about the 3 truths you should ask the people you relationships that people don't, but you should, because that will actually, I think, build strong relationships. And ever since I've been asking those kind of questions, it has resulted in strong relationships, is the lies we tell each other rather than the truths we tell. Mm-hmm. Because the truth is the truth. Like right now, with this whole setup, like there's to get this kind of effect that we're doing, there's like 3 lights here. I'm trying something out different, and there's reasons of why I'm doing it. Like my mom, thanks. If you're watching this, mom, if you watch this, and she's like, okay, your friend is very well lit. You're not. And I'm thinking like, okay, I don't really care about that because most people listen. Like when I listen to videos, I listen to just the audio. But she made a good point because she was clearly telling me from her experience, she'd actually watched it, and that was something that was useful for her. So even if it's not useful for me, it's what it is. The video is what it is. The lights are what they are. I could lie for reasons of why I'm not doing it. I could just say, oh, no, this is just one light. But why would I make up that lies or anything? It's just easier for me to just tell you the truth of what's going on in there because I don't have to make anything up. But we have situations, we have religions, we have faiths, we have all these other structures where Santa Claus, people know that's not true. But there's a general agreement that we'll just continue that lie. So that is one of the things that they kind of exist. And then now when it comes to the specifics, this is more of a recent realization that could be more disturbing to people who haven't really thought of it. I told a friend of mine who I thought would have thought of it. But again, she was like, I haven't really thought about that. When it comes to criminals, the people you actually catch are a self-selected minority within criminals that are either dumb, not capable, or just unlucky that they got caught. Often you'll find a situation, I have separate videos talking about these things where it's like you look at the corruption things and these scandals and what's the state actually doing to catch these things? Do we have structures to protect us from these? And it's often someone will be arrested for speeding, and then to get out of the speeding, and then they'll have some drugs in the back of the car, and then to get out of the drugs, the cop didn't see, oh, that's a drug dealer, let's find him. It's like, no, that person was speeding, and not even probably on their own they could have just been looking across, not paying attention, and they normally drive, okay, then they're speeding, and then the cop pulls them over, sees the drugs, and then because the person has the drugs, they want to get out of that, they'll snitch, and will go down, knock down the dominoes, and then end up breaking down some massive conspiracy. But that massive conspiracy was going on, and the cops would have never actually found that if it wasn't for this chance happening. So the criminals that are actually good, smart, and lucky, you never hear about them because it's what they do. So right now in the current situation that's going on, some of the things are like so absurd. People are like, oh, I can't believe that's too blatant. They wouldn't be able to do this if they were doing this. I'm like, first of all, you're assuming too much that they're too smart. Second of all, the other people looking into it, that's a different situation. There's a lot more eyes on it, both just the average person and the parties involved, than have been in the past. And when it comes down to the cheating, which is close to the polling, where you're saying these are the people who are self-reporting, it's people who are self-reporting that they're cheating. So which of the people would be blatant enough to do that? There's a lot of cheaters. They've already shown themselves being predisposed to cheating. So there's a high chance that if you ask them if they're cheating, they will cheat you and say they're not cheating. So some of these figures and things that we think about, and like you said, they learn and they get better. So that does exist, and they can be these massive organizations of cheating that occur. And it's a thing that we do, and it's a thing that exists.
Well, I remember on the show Oz about the prisons. I don't know if you watch it, but later in the series there was there was the guy who ran the division called M City or Emerald City and ultimately became warden of the prison. He admitted to being a drug dealer, but he told the inmates, he's like, unlike you guys, I was smart enough not to get caught. So it's like he ended up becoming, you know, running a prison, then ended up becoming warden. But it's like he would have been in their position, but he was smart enough to figure out, how do I not get caught? So those types definitely exist.
Like essentially, if you think about most of what state politics is, it's essentially just legalized white collar crime. That is a majority of what it is. And then the enforcement agents are just legal versions of just typical like aggravated assaults and things like that. It's just who we have socially constructed and agreed to accept and lie to each other in an extent that is not a violation of physical physical autonomy. We just say like, okay, we'll lie to each other and agree to not point out the fact that it's a use of force in that sense. But yeah, it's what we do, and I'm not completely against it. I'm just trying to find more. Like I don't want to return to the way the world was 100 years ago, let alone 1,000 years ago. So I'm not rubbishing the structures that we exist today, saying let's just. Am I not just saying we should go to full anarchy? I understand the practicalities. We can't just drop everything and just go. So I'm trying to go towards more a direction of human flourishing, and I think the education system is a key part of that. And that's why this is important. I'm thinking there's better ways to teach kids versus teaching them in this environment where this much cheating still exists, or this temptation to cheat, or in some cases almost a requirement to cheat, where you could argue you would actually be at a massive disadvantage if you didn't cheat. So yeah.
All right, so yeah, we're going to explore some of this below. So this section is called the psychology of cheating. So economics tells us that people will cheat if the benefits outweigh the risks of being caught. Economics by itself, however, doesn't tell the full story. Psychology plays a role here too. So moral psychologist Dan Ariely, I don't know if I'm saying it right. It's Ariely, is perhaps the leading researcher in the world on what causes people to be honest or dishonest. So he does something called the matrix test, where there's a worksheet with many different grids, and in each grid they must identify two numbers combined which have a sum of 10. So to motivate his subjects to do the math, he pays them for each correct answer. He uses a control group whose responses he or one of his assistants scores, and in the experimental group in which the subjects or respondents get to grade themselves and inform the researcher how many questions they got right. So this experiment offers the ability to cheat. It turns out most who can cheat do, and Ariely, I guess, has found a way to anonymously check to see how much they have cheated after the experiment is over. So the amount of money at stake affects the cheating in surprising ways. A sociopath will cheat more when the payout is larger. So you think about that, like who's going to rob banks and do other things. Those are generally sociopaths, but regular people will cheat differently. Ariely finds that average people will cheat more when he pays $10 per correct answer rather than 10. So what's the reason for this? It's what he calls the quote unquote fudge factor. So fudge factor effect. So everybody lies and cheats a little on small things, but only some people cheat and lie on a lot of the bigger things. Here's why. A lot of us have a self-image to maintain. Most people don't strive to be angels, but most people don't want to be devils either. So if morality were graded on a scale of A to F, most people would likely strive for a B or a B minus. And this theory explains a few things. It explains a phenomenon known as moral accounting. We keep a moral tally for ourselves. So it's like if a person does a few right things, they feel like, okay, they can slack for a bit. If they fail at something, they really have to work hard to make things right. It also explains why students cheat here and there, but not all the time. For example, a student may plagiarize a few sentences, but rarely does anyone turn in a fully plagiarized work. So students cheat because most people aim to be pretty good, but usually not perfect. Most people are like this, and of course, college students are no exception. Now, it should be studied whether students cheat differently in different environments or contexts. Ariely has run different versions of this experiment to see what affects cheating behavior. For one, people behave better when they smell cleaning fluids. It's interesting. People cheat more when their peers are cheating, but less when they believe a hated rival is cheating. People are more likely to cheat when they suffer from conflicts of interest, when they're skilled at rationalizing their behavior, or when they believe others will benefit from their dishonesty. They cheat less when they are asked to pledge their honesty ahead of time, or when they are surrounded by moral reminders like religious symbols. He mentions crucifixes, for example, or when they feel like they're being watched. Makes sense. In a book on cheating, James Lang summarizes a vast array of research and concluded that 4 basic background factors influence cheating. Number 1, a high emphasis on performance. Number 2, high stakes. 3, extrinsic motivation. 4, low expectations of success. So it's like you have to look good. It's what pressure are you under? If it's an assignment that counts for a higher portion of your grade, you're more likely to cheat on it. Extrinsic motivation, you're more concerned with getting the grade on the paper rather than just learning the material itself. And then low expectations of success, you think you can't handle it, so you're going to try and cheat to get the better marks. So Greg Dieckhoff studied American versus Japanese students and found that the Japanese students had cheat at a higher rate because their final grade is heavily reliant on one test, whereas with Americans, they tend to be more spread out among various assignments. So I thought that was kind of surprising because the Japanese tend to be very honor bound and very pride themselves on honesty. But because there's so much weight given to that one test, students feel they have to ace that test. So they're more willing to cheat to get that grade. And then part of this also, I'll let you jump in. I just have one more point. So part of this also has to do with what students regard as cheating. Students may regard cheating as less serious than others do, and some may even not agree what counts as cheating. 14% of high school students think that using crib notes during a test is not cheating at all, and 23% think having parents do half their work isn't cheating. By contrast, all faculty surveyed, of course, consider all of this serious cheating. And only 26% of high school students surveyed think having parents do more than half their work counts as serious cheating. So again, it's like it might be that fudge factor a bit where they find ways to rationalize, okay, how is this really cheating? I do a little bit. It's not a big deal. I'm not such a bad person. Okay, so what are your thoughts on this section?
Yeah, it's complicated as some of these things are. I don't think it's convoluted, but for sure some of this stuff is complicated. And like I think it was work or back, I was mixing these things together, taking some notes here. Okay, so with the copying thing, that's true. It's an estimation. Economics, again, why I'm super excited about human action is human action. It's about human action. People who say, "Oh, why do you care about human economics? It's only about money." It's like, no, that's financial economics. That's a section of economics. Economics is literally just human action. It's about being economical with your time. There's ecology things. There's the eco part of it. The nomics is separate. The eco is the key part of it. That's the part you're focusing on. You're studying that thing. So whatever happens in that sense is what you're focusing on. So people are making that decision, saying, okay, we have to weigh the options. And people say, oh, schools are better because they do away with this whole selecting of IQ. But in a way, do they really? Because they are selecting for certain things. It's like we are the water. We are diverse. We are humans. We can mold ourselves to different environments. That's something that has led us to be the top life form on this spaceship Earth, is our ability to live in so many different places. We do certain things and cooperate or not cooperate in different ways. So we can mold that. So when you have a school, when you have a state, when you have a family, when you have an organization, it selects for certain behavioral patterns. It selects for certain behavior, and that's something that you're going to happen. Now, if you have my main objection of the state is the primary thing that makes it different than other places is it has a legal monopoly of violence over a given area. Now, it has many other features, but other things have those features. This is the only one that has that one feature. So if you're looking to use specifically that feature, it's going to select for people to get into that position. So colleges, they give credentials. That's the end kind of goal. It's like, hey, we need to get this kind of prestige and then give a credential. Give that person the degree to actually leave. Say they've attended this place. So you can also just learn basic things and get actual information. You can also do that over the internet. What the internet can't do is grant you the credential. So if you have somebody who's just focused a lot more on just getting the credential, they will go to school and use that system in the most expedient way possible for them to get that and go above and beyond, versus a person who's just like, I'm trying to learn information. So if I'm not learning, I'm not going to apply myself, and I'm not really going to care that much about the degree. So that's part of why I'm thinking it's important to actually talk about like what the actual structure of the thing is. you have anything on that, or
Well, I was going to add too. I mean, I talked to my dad because he and I have been sort of debating these points about college recently because he like is a huge advocate of college, and I think he feels like I have the wrong idea. So he'll sort of challenge me on certain things, and
Yeah.
then he talks about like his time. He went to UMass Lowell and UMass Amherst, and he was like, "Oh, I loved it. It was worth every penny." And then I'm like, "Well, Dad, there's a few things with this. Number one, college costs a lot less. We'll get into this in chapter 11, but I think they said if you were to adjust the cost of college at state universities in the 70s to today's dollars, I think it would be like 2,000 a year. So it's like, what is that? That's not, I mean, that's a minuscule fraction of what I paid. It's like,
Yeah.
if I had paid only 2,000 a year, I'd be like, yeah, this is definitely worth it. So it's a false equivalency. And also there were jobs like at that time, IBM was hiring a lot of chemists. They don't really anymore. So again, looking at it in that context, it makes sense. But again, intrinsic versus extrinsic, like he really wanted to learn this stuff. Like he played with chemistry sets when he was a kid. So it would make sense that he would enjoy it because he wants to learn it. Whereas some of these general studies courses and things, kids cheat because they see it as like, I'm never going to use this again. Why am I learning this? I just want to get the grade and get out of here. So of course they're going to cheat because what's the incentive to like, oh, I'm not going to sit there and learn every aspect of Roman history that my teacher is talking about. It's like, I'm never going to use this again. Like I say this as a huge history buff, so someone like me would find it interesting, but someone who just wants that diploma and get out, I mean, they're not going to put in the same effort. And I told him that, and he actually agreed with me, to be honest.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was going to mention too, the Fudge Factor thing, I think back to, I mentioned the Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort, the real life guy, talking about how he became corrupted, and he did the same thing where it was like, you know, you find ways to sort of excuse your own behavior, and it's like, I'll do this a little bit here. I'll rip these people off a little bit. I'll do this. And then like, I think it's also that effect where they talk about power being as addictive as cocaine. And it gets to a point where you feel like you can do anything. And then it's like, I think he got away with it for so long, but then they even say in the movie, the chickens came home to roost. And it's like, well, the SEC has all this info on you. The FBI is investigating. At some point, it's just going to collapse. But I think because he got away with it for so long, and maybe some of these students too, they just keep doing it. But at some point they get sloppy because they realize at some point, like they think, oh, I'm not going to get caught. But eventually it's like, you're making all this money in such a short time. It's going to raise a lot of red flags for people. You know?
And that what you pointed out there is a good thing. Is the two of you are talking about a certain topic where problems occur not because of what X is, but because of how we define X. So what he thinks about universities is and school and higher education is still entirely true, especially from his lived experience, and still many aspects of what still exists is what he's pointing out. But you're also seeing it from a different point of view. You're focusing on other things that are also true that he might not be able to relate to, and you might not be able to relate to what he's thinking about certain things. Like a simple thing is when we talk about the $2,000, that's in his living memory, and it used to take a lot longer for something like inflation to occur, where the figuring, I think subconsciously some people might still be voting for things like free education, quote unquote, because they still have in mind that it's $2,000. So part of their life might have adjusted to what $2,000 is today versus the percentage of the earnings that it was. Like I mentioned this in our talk before, watching Queen's Gambit, because I'm somewhat fascinated. The topic matter, I like chess. I don't play chess. I used to play it. The topic matter is good. The Netflix show is really done in an excellent way. I don't really give much suggestions in watching things, but that is one. But for me, one of the primary reasons I'm watching it is Anya Taylor-Joy. She's an excellent actress, but she also just, from even just an artistic point of view, she's just aesthetically so pleasing to view, and there's like the neoteny aspect. People say she looks like an alien, but she's amazing to just look at. She looks like she's just photoshopped walking around like a normal person. Okay, anyway, so enough about that. But there's a scene where they're talking about buying a house, and it's like the person's like, I'll pay for your equity in the house. And this person went half and half, I think, with the house, with their wife or something like that, or someone else. They had some equity in it. And the person's like, I want $7,000. And she's like, no, the equity was $5,000. Like, oh, but I want more. Then the person said, okay, I'm going to take out. He said, okay, I'll give you $7,000, and I'm going to subtract the amount I needed to bury this person that is related to both of them, that's involved with both of them. And think about that just in your mind right now. That was a house, an equity for a house, multi-bedroom, 2-level, split-level house with a basement, I think, for $7,000. And this was in the 60s, if I'm not mistaken. It was 69 or something, 69 or 70s when this was set in that time. $7,000. Right now, you probably can't even bury someone in a city for less than $10,000.
Yeah.
So I think when you have older people who might have adjusted the price of certain things, they're thinking, why can't we have a situation where every kid can go to school for $2,000 in this environment where the average salary now, even like below poverty, is considered $35,000? So in that mentality, some people might still think it's an absurdity. But then, as you mentioned, with the inflation of the actual cost of school, it's now much higher of a percent of your actual yearly income, of
Yeah.
the average household income, to actually go to university.
Yeah.
And then the inverse of that, the amount of state financial redistributed from taxation aid back in 1975 is much lower than what it is today. We talked about was like 90%, 93% of student debt is somehow publicly owned. That's
Yeah.
ridiculously high amount. So that's not something they figure in. And then the difference, the nature of the schools that they went to at that time, when those institutions were still younger than they are now, the same way the student will learn how to cheat and game the system, the schools themselves are an organism. And they'll also mature and learn how to focus on a certain aspect of it, which is kind of harvesting students as some kind of resource so they can get the funds. They'll find ways and it will mutate. Schools aren't the same as they were in the 70s, let alone the hundreds of years before. We talked about the first university established. Was it the 1620 something?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. That's those are different systems. So we're not necessarily talking about apples to oranges when we talk about that. And to tie this with one last thing is, you had also mentioned the whole tests. That's the thing. That's why you need to go with these tests, because whenever somebody comes with a test, I'm like, I wonder if they figured this in out. Because they were talking about something like what you're talking about with the Japanese, saying the Japanese are a culture about honor and these things. But are they really? Or do they just cheat in ways that we don't consider cheating? Or are they also just better at cheating? Or they cheat in certain aspects that we would never consider cheating, that they would, but in certain different interactions, they would never cheat, where we normally do most of our cheating. So when we focus on those interactions in specific, we see no cheating there and don't notice the other aspects of it. Because that is one thing to consider with that. And I think you'd find that actually informs some of it. And the other thing is, we were talking about the test with the cleaning, smelling the cleaning fluids. And it was a simple thing I was thinking about, that when it comes to nature versus nurture. That's probably not a simply chemical thing. That probably comes from being in a culture where, when you smell cleaning fluids, that was a position of people removing dirt and cleansing a place and having to be in that situation. You have the whole idea of God cleanses you. It's not, the United States of America isn't based as a Judeo-Christian country. I rubbish that idea. There's separation of church and state. But the people in general, the majority, that did inform it. So that is part of the idea. So that connection that we have, that subconscious connection that we have with cleaning, the action of cleaning itself, to be a positive thing. So when you actually smell cleaning fluids, that bleach, I think it brings those memories of cleaning is going on. So you want to be cleaner in morality and in behavior as well. So you'll probably do that less. Whereas if you had a culture and society where every time bleach was used, it was used to burn things, to destroy things, to dirtify things, I think you'd find the inverse relationship, where if you could select those groups, and I think a good way to test a normal to do this, you'd have to find people who bleach cleaning implements have been used in tough times in their history, and then find one of those groups of people, maybe you find one of those villages untouched where they've never actually smelled bleach in their life, and then see if they would cheat on certain things from simply just having the chemicals that make bleach hit their smell receptors and senses. Because I think it would be, in that situation, it would be a lot more nurture over the actual nature of anything in bleach. But yeah.
Well, I was just gonna add 2 points before we move on to. I don't know if you saw my exchange with our friend Nikki on Facebook, but I talked about how I get grief for not being married with kids, especially from people like my grandpa. Like, he actually was married to my grandmother. They had my mother when they were 22. And I'm like, I would have been an absolute disaster of a parent at 22. And but the thing is too, like, and I try to explain to her, and she's like, do they realize how much different the world is now? Like, my grandmother dropped out of high school. How many guys would marry a high school dropout today? I mean, how many women have college degrees now? How many, and then there's the whole issue we've talked about in a previous video with hypergamy. And if a woman makes good money, wants a guy who earns more than her. And then of course with the online dating, it's like, there's so many other issues. It's like, you're comparing apples to oranges here. And then it's also affected the mortgage thing. Like he talks about like, oh, when I was your age, I had a few houses. Well, the Marines paid for his college, which was a lot less, and he could get a mortgage. A lot of college graduates can't get houses now because they're so in debt, and they're like, we're not going to give you a mortgage while you still have student loan debt. So it's like, these are completely apples and oranges comparisons. Like I understand their angle because they're viewing the world as they grew up in it, but it's like they have to realize it's not the same world anymore.
Yeah, and this is something that as I get older, I realize, and I'm sure I do that too. Often, where I can't really, I'm projecting or not unable to see what somebody else is speaking about, and what is wrong, what is cheating, what is a negative idea, what are these things? These are all kind of subjective things, and I'm trying to remember when they're talking about the people who try to say, is this something I can cheat in? Am I comfortable doing this? If I'm going to get caught? I got to the point where, I mean, when I started drawing, a lot of the drawing I do with the tracing thing used to be like with literal tracing paper, where you'd actually have the tracing paper, put the tracing paper on, and then you do it, you draw the thing, and then you're like, oh, this is a character. And it got to some point where I was like, okay, maybe I'll stop tracing, but I'll still copy, where I'll actually have a source and then have the thing. And then it got to a point after that, soon after that, it was like, okay, first of all, I don't really have that many resources to access the things as I've seen some other people do, but I'm now going to stick to just doing things out of my mind. And that made me able to draw at a different level. But I got to a point where I had a really big aversion to actually even copying stuff, even using source material. But even the greats, they would actually get an actual live, they do the live models and things like that, the Da Vinci's and those sorts. Some of those old sculptures is something I like pointing out occasionally is people look at that and some people today are like, look, women were strong and muscular. So this whole idea that women are supposed to be meek and weak, that's not a true thing. We just talked about that one individual posting thing about the hunters in the past and things like that. I posted something on I saw James Lindsay posted and also posted on his wall on that one. I was like, yeah, they also found out that if they tested some fossilized remains of the males, and it turns out that the female hunters only captured 75% of the meat that the men did. So the earnings gap turns out to be a prehistoric condition. So anyway, but people talk about that. Look at the way females were depicted, but that was done in part because during that time, it was taboo to have women as live models. So the masters and the artists would use a man as a model and just bolt on tits onto them. And that's why some of them are like really masculine, the jaws and things like that. Then they just have tits. So, so I got to the point where I realized there's a practical nature of why people copy art. And now I even have some situations where making some covers and things like that, or just doing different art pieces where I'll literally just take a piece on Photoshop, put the layers on Photoshop or Illustrator, and then I'll do sketches and stuff like this, or then go in and then now copy over. Sometimes it'll be original pieces, sometimes it's based off of drawing. I understand the practicality, and I'm honest and open with that. But this is also a thing that happens. We get caught into copying. Are we just copying things? Your grandfather, does he just expect you to copy and paste what his life was in order to be appropriate? He seems to be jumping over your father, because if I'm not mistaken, he had you a lot later than
he used to give him a time. He's like, your father was a geezer when he got married. He was 34. So like he would, but my grandfather has mellowed out in general. So he doesn't he even said something to me recently, like, oh, I've noticed a lot of your generation gets married older. He's like, that's okay. Like, I think he's relaxed a little bit, but like he used, like, apparently my grandmother was like really obsessive about it. She was the one who passed away earlier this year, sadly, but she would always ask about like, oh, why aren't my grandkids married yet? Why I want grandkids. I want great grandkids, all that. So like she was really hung up on that. But again, it's like, okay, you dropped out of high school and married him. Again, given the time period, it kind of makes sense. But it's like a woman does that today. A guy's gonna be like, sorry, there's all these women with college degrees. Who do I think is? Yeah, I mean, it depends on the guy, and I'm not trying to badmouth her, but my point is, it's like it's a completely different world, as I stated a little while ago. It's not fair to be like, well, I did this, why doesn't everyone else?
And you see, those are two practical good examples. Like with your grandfather, it's just he had certain information at the time, and then he was thinking he's gained more information. It's like, okay, now I can see this. Sometimes if you're a blank slate or don't really have too much put into that folder in your memory file, then once new stuff comes in, that becomes a modus operandi, and that's what you believe and go with. And that's part of why the educational systems are what they are. They want to capture the kid early. What's the thing? Was it Plato or Aristotle who said, one of the older thinkers said, give me a child for the first 7 years and I'll show you the man.
I've
some
heard that.
class.
I don't remember who said it.
Yeah, so you have something like that where they understand that. So this the stuff you come in early, and with your grandmother, I can see that being a similar situation where for her, from that young age, she dropped out of school and now programmed herself and dedicated herself to, yes, doing this is a positive thing because now I'm going to focus on reproduction and I'll marry, I'll have kids,
Yeah.
and then my kids will have kids, then my kids' kids will have kids.
Yeah.
That's the life she's been envisioning since she was that teen that dropped out
Yeah.
of school. So for her, it's a program. It's a lot harder for her to break out of thinking that is the way things should be. Just like it was harder for your grandfather, but your grandfather might have had different operating parameters of the reason I'm ready to do this is because I need to be able to provide X, Y, Z resources. And then from him getting enough information of seeing these different calculations about providing or achieving or getting X, Y, Z resources, he can now kind of rethink his critique of you.
Yeah.
And this is a similar critique I have of the educational system and parents who happily want to send their kids to school. It's because they're operating on, I think, false premises. The schools themselves are also just copy and pasting what was happening in the past structures without understanding why that was happening and being like, okay, we can copy and paste this part because it helps and we don't really need to change this, but maybe we should do this part afresh. Maybe we should try to do this in a different way that's more applicable to what's happening right now. So yeah.
And I've said it a few times too, but it's like, I have those two friends at least who are like, oh, I had a great time in school. System's great. I'm like, it goes both ways. I mean, yes, you can say, Stephen, you're being critical of the school system because you had a bad time. And look, there is some truth to that. But the other side of it is you can't just say, I had a great time. This worked for me. So it works for everyone. It's very short sighted. It leaves out so many factors. We're not all the same person. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So the next section is called cheating from a game theory perspective. Students tend to cheat more when their fellow students are cheating more. The more the public knows that students cheat, the less value a degree has. Now, how much does the public know that students cheat? I'll wager probably not much. I mean, again, people talk about it occasionally, but I don't know if you were to survey the public what they would say if college students cheat. I think it'd be something to research. If everyone or even most people are cheating, it becomes a rational thing to do. So Jason has his students do something that's called the modified dollar auction. It's a variation of an economics game developed by Martin Shubik. So let's have 50 people play it. These are the rules. The opening bid must be $1. The new bid must increase by an increment of $1. The highest overall bidder pays their bid and wins $50. The all losing bidders pay their highest bids but win $0. All losing players must pay a fee of 1/10 of the winning bid. All players must pay a minimum fee of $5 whether or not they bid. So as you can imagine, this escalates quickly because if you don't, you're going to have to pay money. But then the deeper in you get, the more you're going to owe. So that compels you to keep investing more and more. I can write this out and send it to you if it's easier so people don't have to remember what I said. So the rules of the game make it rational. So they keep bidding more and more. And eventually it's one of those things where it's in their self-interest to bid more because they're protecting themselves and they could make more money, but it's socially destructive to everyone else because it gets them to do the same thing. And it's essentially exploit or be exploited. And then they also compare this here to prisoner's dilemma. For those who don't know, that's that experiment where they take two prisoners in two separate cells who can't communicate. And it's if one rats on the other, they get out earlier, but then the other person has a longer sentence. If they're both silent, they each get lighter sentences. If they both rat each other out, they both get longer sentences. But it's tough because they can't communicate. They don't know the other one. So they can't predict what the other guy is going to do. So they have to take the risk of, okay, do I stay silent or do I speak? And then either I get let go early, I stay longer, or we both get lighter sentences. But again, it's like because they can't communicate and they don't know, that makes it tough. And they make the point out cheating is sort of like a variation of this, where it's like you don't know if your classmates will cheat or not. They may not. But then it's like if everyone else cheats and does better and you don't cheat, you're going to get a lower grade. But then do you take the chance of cheating and maybe you'll be higher on the bell curve? And there's all these variables. And they're saying how if grading in a class is mandatory, like if it's mandatory that the class grades on a bell curve, well, a student's rationally motivated to cheat because they want to be higher up on that bell curve. And they take a fictional example with a student named Kevin. They say he's in that situation and basically like, okay, well, if all the students know there's a bell curve, everybody wants to be higher up on the bell curve. Everyone knows that everyone's cheating. Well, everyone's going to cheat. So it's basically a version of this prisoner's dilemma, but on a much bigger scale. And In one of the surveys done, Reva Fish and Gary Hurrod, sorry if I'm saying their names wrong, they asked students how often they plagiarize other documents, whether it be sentences, paragraphs, or the whole thing. Many students claimed that they never did, but they also thought that most of their peers did. So this gets tough because it's like every student says, oh, I don't plagiarize, everyone else does, but that can't be true, because then if everybody's like, I didn't do it, everyone else did, well, those things can't both be true at the same time. And likely the students are lying, and the ones who say, oh, I didn't plagiarize at all, well, they probably did. And then, oh, I'm sure my fellow classmates plagiarized, they're probably overestimating how much they plagiarized. So does cheating work? There haven't been many studies directly measuring this. Many studies examine the relationship between cheating and GPA. As I sort of mentioned earlier, some find that students with lower GPAs cheat more, but some find with the exceptionally high GPAs cheat even more. And so they also said this might be a selection effect, wherein the students who lack confidence may cheat more because they're worried they're not going to make it. But then there might be, as I sort of mentioned earlier, the students with the really high GPAs, it's, okay, I can't have a single B, so I'm going to cheat a little bit to get an A here, but then the rest I achieve through merit. So again, some of this, it's more theoretical. It's a little harder to prove, but there are questions that are at least being asked. Any thoughts or comments?
Yeah. I would assume that there's a high chance most of the people who are listening to this, who chose to listen to this, have heard of game theory and things like that. Game theory, and also what was the
Prisoner's Dilemma.
Yeah. Those are the two things that one thing I've noticed. There actually does one of those or both of those. I'm not going to give too much spoiler material because I really do suggest people watch that show, Queen's Gambit. That came up in Queen's Gambit, and this the general ideology or the general idea behind that. But I've noticed it's kind of the equivalent for screenwriters and authors in the dramatic fields of what sci-fi authors do when they're using like quantum science, where it's like whatever they seem to always find a way to put it in because you can refer to it and make some real practical things, but it seems to be shoehorned into it. Whereas I've looked into some of the stuff and I don't understand the practicalities. I think it definitely does exist. It's an accurate depiction of how many things happen, but that gamification to that level of what the world actually is, I'm not quite sure. And some people make argumentations, like you said, people wonder what's the efficacy of how often do people actually cheat. There's people who swear by game theory and say, oh, if you learn game theory, you'll be able to figure this out. You know, people even going in things like PUA, pickup artists, who will use some sort of game theory when they're actually doing certain things. And not just game theory as no, I got game, I'm spitting game, like don't hate the player, hate the game type of SMV type of situation, but actual game theory in its psychological sense and its academic sense that you were mentioning here. So that's one thing I was thinking about that. But then now thinking about how people cheat and people lie, and as I'd mentioned before, how there's some environments where they increase that. And I think part of a trust-based society, the higher the level of trust is within the society, the more people will realize and be able to act on the whole aspect where honesty, when cooperation is the key, is something that is going to actually be more proficient, be evident. But if you have a low trust society and people aren't really trying to cooperate, lying in general would probably be more beneficial for just your safety and ongoing life. So that's something where I think you have these issues where people don't have the trust and they don't have enough. When people say integration, that's kind of what I'm talking about. I'm not saying you need to just lose who you are, but you need to get to a point where you're familiar enough with your area and people around you to have a level of trust where you integrate them into your in group. They're integrated. They're not they're externals. So those are the kind of things that I think increase the ability or the lack of cheating. And in those situations, I would say most definitely cheating will be a more of a negative. And I think one thing that's unfortunate with the environment that we have in schools is it's a lot of this game theory type of things. There's a lot of this prisoner's dilemma type of thing. You have to be in school. Then after that, people will get into suicide. Some people will kill themselves because they can't get into certain school. Because like your grandmother, she just had that mentality where at a young age, she said successful, which is kind of biological. And hers is more kind of true, the direct immediate biology as a life form. Part of success is reproducing. So that's a key thing. And I think it's a bit removed when you're thinking about schools, because you're supposed to, I think, ostensibly, the reason you want to obtain more information is to be able to be safer, obtain more resources, maintain your life. And when you maintain your life, part of the main purpose of being a life form is reproducing, part of the central aspect. So that's more divorce. But we get to the environment of schools, and we don't just admit that, yes, cheating happens. Yes, this is the kind of the way the system is. Yes, this is an artificial system. It's not, it's a test. Everything is a test. Like this whole idea, oh, we're not going to test anymore. No, everything is a test.
Yeah, life is a test.
System is a test. What it's testing, that is what we're dishonest about. Yeah. So when people graduate, the more schooled you've been, the more chance you are to buy into that lie. And then you get to the real world, the IRL, and people don't owe you anymore. You're not paying them anything to lie to you. Their job doesn't depend on telling you lies like the teachers and administration do, on carrying on this lie. So you get to that point and you're like, why are you lying to me about this thing? Why aren't you, like, we need to make the environment like it is in college. But I'm like, no, if people were honest about what the schooling environment is, they would realize it's a sanitized test version of some not real situation that occurs in the wild, unless you actually create these different environments. But when you're just out there in nature, that's not the way things are. So I think a lot of the frustration we see in society today is people who've been in these test tube environments. We talk about test tube babies and stuff like that. These people are test tube mentalities, test tube personalities being put out in the general public, and they're trying to be like, why don't we have an environment like it was in school out here in public, when the wrong thing is that school no longer does an accurate job of preparing people for what public actually is. So that's the problem that I'm seeing here. It's not necessarily with the kids, not even necessarily with administrations or just the school. It's the system itself. The tool itself is broken.
Yeah. So there's a few comments on some of these things. Did you ever see the Saw movies, the horror movies? Yeah, there was that
that might have missed like 5 and like the latest one or something, but yeah.
There was that grisly version of Prisoner's Dilemma where the two guys chained to each other to that point in the room where one has his eyes sewn shut and the other has his mouth covered. So it's like they can't communicate with each other, but then it's like the only way to get free is for one to kill the other. The one would have to somehow free the other one, but because they can't communicate, they can't do that. It's a really grisly version of Prisoner's Dilemma. But when people describe Prisoner's Dilemma, that's another thing that comes to mind for me. Yeah. So the other things I was going to mention is that we talked about the Japanese. I remember learning that they have what they call cram schools where they have to study a ton. And they say this is why they have one of the highest suicide rates, because the amount of pressure they're under, kids just can't take it and they snap. And Japan used to have the highest suicide rate in the world. I think Korea might have surpassed it, South Korea. But that's just it. Like people under that pressure, some do very well, others just snap. They can't take it. And that's sort of the debate, is like they talk about like Asian tiger moms, and like My Lipstick Lesbian says like her mom was one of those. And that's sort of the double-edged sword there, is that some people work really well, other kids just snap, or they become defiant because it's like there's so much pressure and they're like, you know what, I'm going to go my own way. So, it's tough. It's that. But again, I think culturally it's sort of that one size fits all approach of like, well, my parents were super strict. I'm successful. I'm going to be super strict. And then I've also seen it go the other way too, where people had really strict parents, so they get so relaxed. And then it's like, but then the kids end up disasters as well. Mm-hmm. So it's like, it's tough. I think it has to be, it has to sort of be strategized based on each student and character. And then to sort of do another game theory thing, I was thinking of Brian Kaplan's analogy about college degrees and signaling in general, where it's sort of a simple analogy, but it's like standing up on something at a concert. Like if you stand up, you can see over the crowd, but then what happens is if everyone else starts doing that, then what happens? We're all standing at the same level. Then you have to get even higher to see the concert. And that's sort of the effect degrees are having, where it's like at first a few people are standing on those stools. Yeah, they can see higher, but then everyone does it. Okay, now everyone's at the same level. So then what? Okay, everyone has to stand even higher, and it's just on and on. And at some point it's like, we can't all be standing on towers in the sky to view a concert in front of us. It doesn't make any sense. And that's where he's saying like, we need to sort of re-examine these ideas. And then the last thing I was thinking of when I started my internship, I remember my chef saying to me, like, he's a British guy. He's like, Steven, you need to work faster. You can't work like a fucking slug. You're not paying me money to work here. I'm paying you. And it's like, but that's how it is ultimately. It's like in school, it's like, yeah, you're paying so they can hold your hand. They can allow your mistakes, all that. But the industry, it's like, no, you're there at their expense. So you have to bring in more money than you cost. So that dynamic just changes completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that that is a harsh reality
Yeah.
that is not really told in school, because I think like if you tell them that in school that, hey, when you get out there in the world, whoever is paying you directly will be the one who can demand what you do,
Yeah.
and you will be the one serving at their leisure. Then most of the kids will then realize that even though they're at a school that pays 16,000, that supposedly costs $16,000 a year, they're somehow only having to fork over 1,000, and then they start thinking, wait, who is paying the rest? Then they
Yeah.
realize, oh, that's the state.
Yeah.
So who's actually deciding what this teacher is actually going to do? Who is the teacher serving in this situation? Oh, they're serving the state, not me. So
Yeah.
that's something that you probably don't want to remind your kids. And I think even if you did remind the kids of that and they knew that, it would still be a better situation, because in that situation, there's still a cooperation going on. There's still some selection, especially in higher education versus the compulsory K through 12. You still kind of apply to a certain place, and then you go there, and most people have one or two different choices of where they can go or they cannot go. That's not 100%. So I think that being there, and then in that case, you'd have to make a better case for why the state is something that you'd want to serve its needs. So that's something in there. But one thing you're pointing out with talking about the Japan, bringing that up again, is we look at that, and yeah, South Korea I think has passed it, but for sure I think South Korea, of the countries that we have testing for, is up there with Russia on levels of alcohol abuse. They're just
Yeah.
workaholics. They
Yeah.
just drink like absurd amounts.
Yeah.
And one thing that I got as I started looking more into politics in 2015 around there is there's some people, I call these people like the salt right, and where they go a lot on the race realism, where they're like, we need a homogeneous society, we need this and this, where they take the description of integration to mean homogeneity, like in race. Then they'll look at a place like Japan and focus on the data point of that place is safer. There's not that much like actual the type of visceral violence that we see in the United States of America. They'll discount the fact that there's also fewer guns, but they'll focus on that part there and then say that, oh, they'll also discount the fact that in the United States of America, the violence is actually very isolated to certain specific areas. But they'll focus on the data point of they have 95% or so just Asian people, but they don't come to Kenya and say, oh, there's 95% the same demographic breakup. So anyway, they'll focus on that and say, because they're homogeneous, that's why there's safety. But integration does not mean, it's not the same as consanguinity. Like, because a lot of them are not completely advocating that if they say just having a similar race automatically makes a place better, then wouldn't it be better to also just go even deeper and just reproduce within your family tree and just have complete incest? If you wanted some purity of racial stock, that is the key thing. But no, humans are more than just our physical selves. There's ways to actually have social constructs and contracts where we actually have some organization. And the United States of America is one of the places that's had that. If we actually value the primacy of that order and the rules and the laws, and actually follow those agreements and actually do them, and then we can also adjust them, we can also amend those and grow them. That's the same thing with the schools. There's certain safeties in schools, but people will focus on certain aspects of it and say, this is why it's horrible. These people are being assaulted in this section. These people are being failed in this section, and then ignore all the other people, or ignore the other people that have been harmed by the changes they want to say that if we make sure everyone has this, it's going to actually help more people. So those are the things that are problematic when we get into these situations. We're cheating ourselves with some of these things by not taking the time to actually research and get more information on it.
Well, just 2 points before we move on to the last section. We talk about like giving value versus costing value, and I tried to explain this to that busboy a while ago who kept complaining about wanting to make more money. Where like at this French place in the city, La Coucou, the sommeliers actually make like 150K a year. But I made the point, but think about how much. But to think about it this way, how much wine do they sell? If you can sell hundreds of thousands of dollars, even $1 million of wine a year, yeah, you're worth more than your weight in gold. Well, yeah, I'm exaggerating a little, but it's like, you get my point. It's like it was like my actor analogy I've made a few times. Like DiCaprio gets paid 25 million in a movie, but it makes hundreds of millions because he's in it. Well, it's worth paying him that. It's the same thing here. It's like, how much value are you adding versus if you're paying a teacher in Wine's class to learn this stuff, you learn it, but it's like they're taking time to show you, walk you through all this and everything, versus you on your own, you have to study a lot on your own and actually be able to prove it. And like, if you go to like the court of master sommeliers, there's all this stuff with like blind testing. You have to be able to identify some wines by like the specific tinge of red it is. And like, you know, all this stuff. It's like not anyone can just walk in and do that. Then that gets into questions of like, how developed is your palate, like your eye for detail, like, you know, that's why they're making all this money. And then the other thing, I've been meaning to find this too, but Wilfred Riley actually debated Jared Taylor a number of years ago about the whole race realism thing. And they talked about like more versus less homogenous societies. And of course, Jared Taylor argued that, no, we need more homogenous societies. They're more efficient. There's less conflict, all that. Now, Riley argued the opposite, that no, there are societies. Yeah. He argued that no, there are societies. Does
Taylor like not know what Europe is? Does he not know the history of Europe?
But I've been meaning to find it. No, but he also talked about other things too. Like he talked about like some of those Balkans countries, how they're racially homogenous, how poor they are. Then of course there's other countries that are mixed, how much wealthier they are. And I want to see, but they got deep into it because they explored both points pretty well. So I've been meaning to find that as well. But you know, anyone who's interested in these subjects might like that. All right, so just going to get into the last section here.
Just one more thing. Like you mentioned the actors, and that's the thing with the value. It's how much you can earn, different things like that. And the people who are teaching critical theory will tell you that's valuable because it's valuable to them. It earns them money. It costs them far less to tell you the lie that it's not that valuable. I had the experience of teaching a graphic design and animation course here in Kenya, and some of the students came up and asked me like, should I take this course? I'm like, I kind of don't think you will unless you want to teach, because I'm not really seeing the market and not seeing that there's that much actual practical nature of doing it. Like you can get online, you can learn these things. You can also go online and try to go on these different sites where you're doing work for people outside. But if you just like, oh, you want to start a shop here in Kenya, might not be the best major for you to take. It's a bit practical that they could lose me students and things like that, but I wasn't as invested in that whole system. I'm also very pro honesty. But when it comes to that, when it looks at the actress things, people look at me and say, oh, like when I was talking about Anya Taylor-Joy before, if you think that doesn't matter, just imagine a role with Anya Taylor-Joy and then put Leonardo DiCaprio in it. Would you still like that role exactly the same? Hell, imagine putting me or Steven in that role. Would you still watch it in the same way? Chances are you would not. Yeah. But so the visuals count. That value is actually in there. There's value added to that whole proposition. Now, when it comes to critical theory, people will tell you that is valuable. Then from then, you'll be told and you'll believe the reason the teacher told me this is valuable and why I spent 4 years of my life studying this is because it's valuable. It's what should matter. That kind of thing actually matters. You focus on critical race theory. Then you'll get out in jobs. And instead of focusing on the practicality of why certain actors are in certain fields and things like this and earn certain amounts of money, and why Jennifer Lawrence is making 20 million, yet some brand new actor who just moved in from like Oklahoma, a male actor, is making 100,000 for his role. You're not understanding that dynamic, and you're thinking we just need a race swap because you think that's valuable. Oh, we'll just switch this, and there might be a few people out there who might virtue signal and say, "Oh, Batwoman is black now. I'm going to watch." But if she's not a good actress, if it doesn't make sense within the story, it's not going to be valuable enough for that project to actually get off the ground or maintain itself. So those practicalities come, and you see these things happening everywhere. Some of the people in Hollywood, some of the people who are deciding what is going to be greenlit, they also have that as a background. Or they're simply just hearing, look, we have 1 million college graduates following this person on Facebook with her or she that's all pro critical race theory, this thing. So they'll think, let's try to get these people to come. But then they don't understand that for these people, their value in critical race theory is more for signaling and doesn't really inform their actual spending in films, and then they'll be destroyed. So this is key. The Cathedral, the Ivory Tower, is so key, is the keystone in all the things that go on in society. And that's why this topic is uniquely important in ways that other things are not. It's a nexus of sorts that all of us kind of are put through in some kind of way or form.
Sure. All right. So the last section here, it's the solutions. So what can be done on this? It's kind of tough. Conservatives, of course, complain about moral decay and the decline of traditional values. Of course, my grandfather's one of those. Leftists complain about corporatism, consumerism, and neoliberalism. Again, no proof of that either. And there's actually, as far back as cheating has been tested, the rate is about the same or even higher. And James Lang also mentions, he wrote that book on cheating, mentioned above, that it's been widespread for thousands of years, including in the Olympics and Chinese imperial examinations. Because I don't know if you know, but in imperial China, there was a thing where if you were from a village and you were unknown, you could take a test. And if you scored well on it, you could get hired to work in the government because you showed potential. But people cheated on those too, not surprising. And when cheating is widespread, we can't blame it on flawed character. We have to examine the environment, reduce the incentives to cheat, and make it difficult for cheating to pay off. Again, the game theory thing. McCabe and company found that honor codes, when internalized by a student body and controlled by student honor councils, seem to work. We're social animals, and when cheating becomes commonplace and nobody cares about it, it'll happen more. But if there are social pressures to be honest, it will be minimized. It's a double-edged sword. Academic honesty is self-reinforcing. If a place is known for being tough on cheating, dishonesty isn't tolerated, people are going to be more honest. But then the reverse is true too. If it's known that a lot or everyone cheats, well, everyone's going to keep cheating, because why not? Now, students can reduce professors can reduce cheating by mixing up their assignments. Also, a lot of smaller assignments rather than a few big ones. So there's lower stakes on each assignment. So they have to be diligent on each assignment to overall get a good grade. Whereas if there's that one big test, they're going to get nervous and possibly cheat. And students cheat when they care less about the material. So they said, of course, give students more freedom in picking classes. Like, again, my friend who studied gender studies, whatever we think of that, she did well in that, but she wanted to learn it. So she's going to make an effort to actually study the material. Whereas if you were to dump someone like me in there, I would probably study enough to pass the class and that's it. And this would also mean eliminating a lot of the general education, or at least minimizing the courses. We talked about that in the last 2 chapters. So it should also be pointed out here, though, that reducing cheating also comes at the professor's expense, because professors want to spend more time on research and less time on teaching. So it's easier for them to keep teaching the same things year after year. My dad talked about when he picked a psychology teacher, there was this one old guy who had taught it for 20 years, apparently had the exact same material for 20 years. And then there was like a younger hippie guy who he took and he actually enjoyed, but he was kind of like a fun, like energetic kind of guy. So, there's that as well. But then again, it would take time away from research and other things, or some people, it's just laziness. It's like, oh, it's just easier for me to keep saying the same stuff. And it's one of these things, I say this a lot in political versus economic issues, where it's not fundamentally complicated to reduce cheating. It's just hard politically, because you would have to get the professors to do all this. And Jason's colleagues do this at Georgetown. The professors add custom questions to their unanimous course evaluations, which we talked about in another chapter, and they ask if the students cheat. And they say that these are anonymous and there are no consequences to what students write. Some students will spite their professors and openly admit, yeah, I cheat in this class for sure. So it makes teachers at least more wary. Okay, I do have cheaters in this class. I need to be wary. I may not know who it is, but at least I'll be careful. And then this sort of makes the point that although course evaluations as they are very flawed, they don't necessarily have to be, because this proves how they could be valuable. So that's all I have on this chapter. Silas, any more thoughts or ideas you want to convey?
The teaching, as you said, there's incentives for different parties involved in this. With the people who don't go to school, the people who are in the school, the administration, the students, the teachers. There's incentives, and we're trying to have a discussion of, are these incentives appropriate? Can we improve the incentives? Can we remove some of the detrimental ones? Can we increase the ones that are positive? And what is the shared goal that we're trying to get to? At the end of the day, what is the point? Is it simply just the information about X topic being able to be absorbed by Y person so they can apply it in Z productive way? If that is purely it, then even if that's purely it, is there a way to have a system that's a one-size-fits-all? Is this industrial system experiment the actual best way to do it? Can we take advantage of all the technology that we've created? And that's what I'm saying. Like, yes, all this technology has been created, and then people look at the technology and say, oh, the technology is correlated to the increase of education, of schooling. But is it causal? That's a different argument. But despite the schooling actually existing, we still have all these other things. But my argument is that I think if we adjusted the schooling, we could actually have more of these positive things. And then we need to focus on which are the specific parts about schooling that were condensed and done better in the school that pre-existed schooling, and which are the new things about the realities that we have that could be integrated into schooling or added to it, modified, that actually lead to the positive things. And then we have, of course, things like you mentioned, the praxis, and there's many other people actually working on this content and this information. And despite the current heat that's going on right now, there's something else that was happening bigger, like larger behind this, that I think is causal to some of the issues that are happening right now with the worldwide pandemic. But even before that, I think we were at some zeitgeist level change in human society. My whole observation, I had a bit of a crisis in my life like 5 years ago, just things slamming together, realizing I wasn't doing things in certain ways. I wasn't quite being honest with myself about and trusting myself into what I was actually seeing. And I started to realize how much people do that and how comfortable people seem to be with not knowing things yet pretending they know them. That's the creepiest part. Saying I don't know, not knowing things, I'm okay with that. I'm just really weirded out by the people who pretend to know the things that they don't know or can't, or like realistically just can't even know. So anyway, that happened, and I started thinking we're leaving the information age and coming to the age of understanding. And that's something that I'm pushing. And I'm thinking there's a lot of things that we've discussed that actually show that the environment of universities, of college, of higher education as we see it, might not be that inducive to understanding as we think. To have all this ability for cheating kind of shows that I think cheating reduces understanding. And to have this level, what are the things, and specifically when we're talking about this chapter, can be done to reduce that cheating and increase understanding in the age of understanding that I think is going on. Yeah.
Well, and I was going to just sort of add too. I mean, one of the advantages I've had is I've worked in food service. It's very hard to cheat in because think about it. It's like you can't fudge a dish. It's like you put out an undercooked steak, someone's going to send it back. Overcooked, same thing.
Yeah.
It's like you know the chef will taste your stuff before you plate it. It's under over seasoned. You're going to get screamed at. So it's like certain things like that. I guess because it's so you feel like a slave to customers at times, but because of that type of service, it's like you're so beholden to what people want. Now, some people have argued that a lot of sommeliers kind of BS things. Some don't know as much as they're talking about. But even there, that's debatable because if you get someone who comes in who knows wines well and the sommelier doesn't know what they're talking about, they're going to find out right away. So it's like there are those mechanisms in place in business environments to make sure people do the right things. And what you just said about people saying they know a lot more than they do or whatever, I think that's a form of signaling. That's what the elephant in the brain talked about. Like, that's why people will give to charity and other things. It's like they want to give the impression that they know more than they do or they have more than they do. Now, fortunately, those people usually get found out. Like the guy I talked about saying, you know, oh, I was sous chef at Boulay for a year. And then we talked to his coworkers are like, he was there for a month. So it's like, those people ultimately get found out. It's like, you know, it's the same thing with this. It's like, yeah, you can coast your way through school, but then the employer says, what can you actually do? And if you don't deliver, that's it. And that relates to the earlier point about even people from lesser known schools who got really good grades, but went to the lesser schools for other reasons. They're still smart. They're still hardworking, all that. So once they're in the real world, as long as they're still like that, they're going to do well. So there's those things to consider too.
Yeah, and just two more observations on the cheating thing. Like that's the thing. People look at certain lies and like, why would somebody make such a blatant lie when you can simply just pick up the phone and call? But like with that sous chef, chances are they were personally, and I mean not assume their gender, they were personally.
It was a man.
Okay, they were personally too lazy to actually, or they had a mentality where they wouldn't actually do the steps taken to actually be at that place for a year. Yeah. So they can maybe project that, oh, maybe if I just say this, these other people are also kind of like me, and they wouldn't actually even put that little extra effort because they're not as invested into it, just like they're not invested into it to actually check, whereas it's a simple check. So in their mind, they don't think somebody can simply do this. And keep that in mind when you look at why certain people tell lies, because they also don't really imagine that somebody would actually check. That's why in some cases when people say certain things and you ask them, what do you mean by that? Why do you say that? Where is your evidence? They seem to be taken aback. And I'm wondering, why didn't you ask that question? Are you surprised that I'm asking for evidence? But I'm also thinking about, look at the environment they come from. There weren't that many questions in that environment. Yeah. Things were taken for granted. Maybe they weren't actually taught the value of that. They don't value that aspect, or they're just not that invested in that thing to actually back it up. So that's one thing in mind. And a separate thing that's also related with the food and the cooking is I saw this one clip. It was this British show or something. This woman, I guess I don't know what kind of show it was, but she put some glitter on her face and she was all dressed up, kind of a little short person, but she had some friends over and they're having some kind of dinner party, and she had this accent, like this really deep accent. And then she says, okay, next we're going to have steaks. And then I can't even do the accent. I don't know, whatever. It's some Cockney type of thing. But she goes to the kitchen and she asks the guests. It's like three or four guests that she has over there. And one of the person says, I want it. What's the term when it's like blue? Is that like really
black
just super
and blue?
rare?
Yeah, it's like seared hard on the outside, but it's like pretty much raw or close to it inside.
Okay.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, so one of the ladies, the females there, she said that. Then somebody else said rare, and then somebody else said like medium rare, and then the fourth person said something else. So the host, she gets up and she goes to the kitchen, and they're kind of mocking her because she was using the oven mitts to flip the steaks and the potatoes she had. She did this thing where she boiled the potatoes or something and put them in the oven for a while, and then I don't know if she fried them first and then put them in the oven, then boiled them. I think there was boiling. There was either boiling and frying or boiling and oven. I was like, okay, it wasn't necessarily, but she was using the oven mitts the whole time. And the steaks, she just took the steaks, fried them all the same on the pan, put them all in the oven at the same way, and then takes them back out and serves them to the people. It's like, oh, this is for you. It's all the same steak. And everybody's eating it like, okay, like, I'm not quite sure this is Americano. They're kind of asking her and they're saying, what's going on in this? And then it's like, oh, it's kind of okay. And then one of the guys is like, what is this? Like, he's like, what's your favorite thing to cook? Like, if you just come home and you think you cook something good, what do you do? And she's like, it's spag and thing. Then he's like, then why don't you just make that? Why don't you just make what you know? Like, because this is garbage. This is not good. And then the other people are like, oh, you can't tell her that. I mean, he's supposed to. And he's like, no, let's stop these lies. Let's just be honest. Let's tell her the truth. This is garbage. You know this is garbage. This is not Americano, or this is not what this kind of steak. And that guy, I feel I am that guy a lot. I'm just like, I just want people to just focus on the truth. Stop the lies. Stop the cheating. Stop all these things. Get some understanding. That person's not going to understand what you did is wrong if we pretend nothing happened. Like, why would you actually ask them what kind of steak they wanted when you had in your mind somehow, or if you didn't have that in your mind, let's say you went back and you got to the kitchen and you realized, I actually don't know how to make a blow. I don't know how to do medium rare. They're all going to be the same steak. At that point, why didn't you realize, because you know you're going to serve them, why don't you realize and go back out and say, okay, it's just going to be the same steak. Is that okay? And then once you are served the steak that is clearly not blue, it's clearly not rare, why decide that you're just going to lie and pretend that person did not just ask you what you wanted and go to the kitchen and bring out something that is entirely not what you wanted? I don't like those kind of social interactions. I understand why it might be practical in some cases, but I couldn't understand in that dynamic. And maybe I am a bit alien in that sense, where it's I'm demanding too much from people or projecting my set of values, and then looking at self-selected friends like Steven here, who I think values truth and inquiry at a similar level that I do. And that's one thing that I'm also realizing more and more from viewing the cacophony or the inanity that's going on right now in the world is that I'm not surprised so much about the things that have been going on, but I'm still taken aback. It's still new. It's still like, oh, I didn't expect that. But I'm not surprised because I don't put things beyond humans. Yet some people seem very surprised, like, oh, I can't believe this is happening. Where it's like, if you actually understood what those people were, this wouldn't be surprising.
I'm similar with cooking. Like, I'll be critical of friends and family's cooking, but I make the point, I'm consistent. If you can criticize my cooking too, like if it's, hey, you could have used a little less salt. I like it a little more rare. I like it a little more like, understand, I don't take that personally. It's like, okay, this is the person's taste. Maybe I screwed up, all that. But it's like, it's being willing to do that better. And like, I've taught my mother some things about like brining things in advance, resting meat, all that. And she's grateful. And it's like, I'll still criticize certain things, but I do it in a polite way. I'd be like, I would have put a little more salt. I would have let it rest a little longer, things like that. And like, it just, people have to be willing to acknowledge that, look, they don't have the best technique. It's like, you're not a chef in a 3 Michelin star restaurant. You know,
Yeah.
there's always things there. I mean, and even there, a lot of those people, I mean, Thomas Keller has even said like, oh, I still have things to learn and all that. And, you know, it's like, that may be fake humility. I mean, I hope it's not, but like, it's like, if you're someone who's just cooking at home, yeah, there's probably a lot you have to learn, and myself included. You know? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a good topic. I think that's part of why I started the whole "you are
Yeah.
what you consume," because there's so many things we all eat. That's one of the basic things that we do. We all consume, and that's a good thing to just play off of things. And now, when it comes to this topic of cheating, what is cheating? Do people think like secret recipes is that cheating? Not coming out and telling people what's in the food that they ordered, like is that some kind of cheating? I don't think people would consider that cheating. Like I had this plan of doing this chefing it up site where people do these cooking things. Like I made this dish for my friend off of this recipe that I learned from my mom, but then it's a different thing where it's like I know how to make the food, but I told her that I'm going to show you the recipe of this, like record a video and send it to you once I get home. But then I figured out that wait, actually, I don't actually know the measurements. I just kind of make it. It's just like the way I do it. And it's taken me like years to actually do it. I just uploaded it on the post production thing I'm going to do. Actually, I think it'll be up by the time. I don't know. I might leave a link to it. I'm going to write that down. If it's up and that's a project that I'll do, I might leave a link to the actual meal here. But that recipe, when I told her I was going to show her that information, at that time I already knew that I wasn't completely cognizant that I didn't know the actual measurements of what I do. I'd seen recipes and followed recipe videos, so I had an idea of what that's supposed to be and conveying information in that way. But even though I had the ability to create it and the intent to inform her about it, I didn't have, I think, the structuralized way that that information is normally taught and conveyed. And even with my intentions at that time, I didn't plan on taking these years to actually get the video together. I actually recorded, I tested it a few times, tried to actually understand the measurements, figure out a way to actually get like a phone over and record it and everything. Finally did that, I think, in February. And then it just sat there for different reasons. I wasn't lying to her when I said, this is the information that I will send you shortly. But it's lasted this long. So that's a similar thing that I'm saying to what's happening in the schools. Most of them, I don't think schools are lying when they say, we want you to come here and learn. I don't think parents are lying when they say, I want my kids to go to school to learn. I don't think kids are lying to say when they go to the schools with the intention to learn. But all those things combined, is it similar to me where it's like, despite the intentions, there are other practicalities and things that happen in their life that lead to the actual eventual realization of that intent of me conveying that information to my friend about this recipe might take years past the time of originally thought it would take to do this. And that's what we see, I think, with the educational system, where people go to learn one thing and then turns out later on what they actually end up doing productively is something that they never actually learned in school, or that content from school actually sinks in 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line before it's actually practical. Can we get that shorter? Can we get to that end point faster? I think we can. I think there's ways to do that.
One example of cheating that came to mind, I don't know if this is 100% verified, but there was this German certified master chef at CIA, and supposedly, well, it used to be that on the certified master chef exam, you would trim vegetables like mushrooms and things, and they would actually measure your trimmings to make sure you didn't trim off too much. Apparently, he put some of them in his pocket, and someone said to him, they're like, "Chef, you cheated on the certified master chef exam." He goes, "Oh yeah, it was good." So it's like, I don't know if if he actually got his his certificate purely because of cheating, but like, you do wonder things like that, you know?
Yeah, but you see, like in that case, in the practical nature, if they're measuring it, because if you measure it, that's what's going to be served to maintain that high standard. So if he hides stuff and he does it in his own kitchen in the same way he doesn't serve the stuff that's not right, and the only thing that will be testable will be what's actually served to the people ahead. In the restaurant nature, it might increase with higher costs because like you're wasting food, or there's going to be food that's not going to be able to be used for the purpose that it was purchased for. But in the practical nature of it being testable in society, him cheating on that in the main interaction of a certain meal being ordered to be at a certain quality level actually is something that does select for him still being able to achieve at least that part of the interaction in nature, in the general sense. So that's what we've been talking about here. There's some aspects of the cheating that not all cheating is made equal. I'm not on that whole every sin is the same. That whole like situation of just using God's name in vain is the same as murdering someone. No, I'm not one who believes that kind of thing. And to finish off, at least for me, I think with the cheating thing, if people really do think, oh, it's because of this structure, it's because of this, it's because of that, I think there's internal things that we can judge and we can base on, and we can have a situation where we have an understanding, we have an appreciation for each other and humanity, where we understand cheating is not a positive thing, stealing is not a positive thing. Better ways to do things. So just think about the last time you could steal something like a pencil or a candy bar, something you liked that was relatively inexpensive, both to the person who purchased it or anything, and you didn't do it. Like, did you do it? Did you not do it because you, like, let's say there was no chance, almost no chance, you were as sure as you can be of anything that you would be caught for doing it. Why didn't you do it?
Yeah.
And I think most people, if you think about that, you will be able to understand that there's things that you learned to inform such a basic aspect of cooperation, of society, that didn't necessarily come from a school. And
Yeah.
having that feeling is much more important than I think anything that you can just in general say that can only be delivered from the educational system that it is now. So if I had a way to teach or to inform people of those things that support your idea to not steal that thing, and abolish all, if I had to abolish all schools to do that, or say I have to abolish those things, or just say I have to have universal schooling and still be in the society that we are in now, I would rather the society where we do away with the educational system, but find a way to have everyone to have that understanding that you had, that supported your correct reason, your, I think, more beneficial reason to not steal that thing, even though you could have not gotten away with it. So that's my closing on the cheating. What is it? Cheaters
Everywhere.
Cheaters everywhere on chapter 9.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. That's all I have. So, yep.
Okay.
Cool.
So thank you all out there for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this. You can let us know what you think in the comment section. And we have 2 more parts of this to go, 2 more chapters to go, and then 1 more of conclusion. And then we'll get on to the next series. Please like, share, subscribe wherever you actually listen to this. Thinking of getting a newsletter and other things up, but I shall inform you wherever you listen to this. Once I get those other things that I'm thinking and planning of doing, I will be posting those up. And those things, if they happen before this video is posted, will probably already be posted somewhere, and you can check that out. I think for now, just you can write down carbon33.com, because I think that will, no matter what I do going forward, that will be one source where you'll be able to find some links to that information, either directly or indirectly, but that will form as it comes. And with Stephen, I think Stephen, I'll definitely have his contacts there. His contacts are somewhere on the screen, probably somewhere below. You can get in touch with him through here, or he has socials, but whatever I'm doing forward to the project and conversation series, I think I will also involve him with that. So you'll be able to find some contacts and stuff there as well. Anything else?
Nope, that's all I have.
Okay, goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.